Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
Well, I am so excited about this interview. This is probably, I love how our interviews operate like Legos.
Yeah.
And they stack.
They
and
do.
And they build and they connect. And so I really see today's episode as a really great connection Lego to just our series of equipping ministry leaders and parents. And this man, Mr. Israel Wayne, I told you earlier off the air that he got me in the jugular.
Yes, did indeed.
This is an incredible interview, and he challenged so many areas for me as a mom in navigating the techno world and the technology world. And I do have gamers in my house, and knowing how to navigate it has been tricky. And I've voiced to you just mom shame in this area. And so he really set me free and equipped me. And so I'm excited. So one of the things he talks about later on, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I do. Hold on a second, because you introduced mom shame.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'd really like to give people a peek behind the curtain here on a couple of things we talked off the air before we got on. I mentioned to you, I said, I really appreciated your perspective on different speakers, because as our team selects speakers for our conference and for our audiences, you kind of nuance something. And I think all ministry leaders need to hear a comparison of how he tackles this versus some of the other speakers. So would you unpack mom shame from the idea that when teachers, pastors, and youth pastors are addressing parents and adults, how to do it without the mom shame or dad shame?
I think we have to be really mindful of everybody in the room. It's that know your audience, because we can all have the perspective of take all the devices away from your kids, take away all of social media, no gaming. And I get that. And I completely support families that have chosen that path for their family. I respect it so much, but that's not what we've chosen. And my kids are gamers. My kids play, they have devices. You know, we did pray about that decision, and that's the path that we chose. And so I want to be equipped on how to navigate the path that we chose. I don't want to feel bad about the path that we chose. And so I think that's the mom shame. And I think it's various things. I don't think it's always in technology. I think, I don't want to feel like a failure because my kid has a phone.
Yes.
And I think I just want to learn how to manage and walk with him. I want to disciple him. I think discipleship, and let me just take this a step further. I think discipleship is branching off into different ideas. And yes, we've got to give them a biblical worldview. We've got to teach them God's word. We've also got to teach them about lust and sex and sexuality. And then we've also got to teach them about technology discipleship. So I think there's discipleship, paths that are converging, and I don't, you know what I'm saying? And so I want to equip my kids to know how to master technology and not let technology master them. And so that's why I so appreciate Israel Wayne's perspective, is he gives great insight to help me help my kids have limits.
Yes. I think that is so good. And I just wanted our when we did our episode back, it was actually 322, I believe, with Katie Fruget. We talked about a very tough topic, dealing with abortion, and that can often come with shame as well.
Right.
And I just think that what Marianne just coached us on is a good reminder, regardless of whether or not it's technology, a tough topic, purity, whatever the topic is. We don't do it with shame, guilt, or any other leverage other than the Holy Spirit nurturing and gracefully bringing people to these areas. That might be enough for us to jump off into this interview. What do you think, Marianne?
Absolutely. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it truly is. And we can come back on the other side and kind of debrief this. So let's listen to the instruction without guilt and shame from Israel Wayne.
Right now, I am joined by Israel Wayne. Israel is a father of 11 who is passionate about defending the Christian faith and developing a biblical worldview. He is the director of Family Renewal and author of multiple books, including Raising Them Up, Parenting for Christians, and Pitching a Fit, Overcoming Angry and Stressed Out Parenting. Israel, thanks for being here today.
It's a blessing to be with you. Thank you.
So we're talking about an issue that no parent out there is facing whatsoever. Navigating screens and media. I'm sure no one can apply this to their lives. No parent out there is going, what do I do with screen time? Not an issue at all. Obviously, I'm not being serious with that. I'm curious with you're a father of 11.
Correct.
Do you have any idea how many screens are even in your home or
Way
around?
Too many. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I actually have 4 teenagers living at home with me right now, and a tweener and a 21-year-old who works full-time. But yeah, I mean, this is super relevant for my family as well as I do parenting seminars around the country, and it's probably the number one question that I get asked from parents is, how do we deal with screen time and navigating multimedia?
Yeah, I've heard people say that, like, once you get teenagers in the house, when you start looking to, like, how many devices are connected to the Wi-Fi, it looks like a grocery list, and a big one at that.
Right.
So, yeah, this issue, I think if we would have gone back maybe 15 years ago and done this, we might be talking only about teenagers. The crazy thing is we're probably now talking about teenagers all the way down to toddlers
Absolutely.
For screen time because the phone has become a babysitter in a lot of cases. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about this today. Hopefully you don't make it too convicting on me. I may get up and walk off if that's the case. Parents may shut this off and be like, no, this isn't right. But no, I think this is going to be really good because every parent, I would reckon say every parent is dealing with this to some extent. So like I said, this is one of those things I'd really love to say that you're talking to our audience, but not me, and I can just ask the questions, but that's going to be a lie. Because even for me, there are times where I will have a sport on TV, I'll have another one on my computer, and I'll have my phone in hand scrolling social media. Not healthy whatsoever, and that's what I'm doing and not even realizing it sometimes. So I may not want to know the answer to this, but how prevalent is screen time for both adults and kids?
Yeah, so the latest statistics are that teenagers are spending 7.5 hours a day after school in digital media, and it's actually 10.5 hours of data compressed into a 7.5 hour time space because they're doing what you're talking about. They're multitasking.
Wow.
So they have information coming in from more than one stream. And so the interesting thing is that parents are on par with their teenagers. They tend to do a little bit more television and Netflix. So the average parent now is spending 4 hours every night of their life in television or Netflix, but a total of 7.5 hours a day in screen time. And one of the things that I think is ironic is whenever I do parenting seminars, people come up to me and say, we're concerned about our children and how much time they spend on screens. But statistically, parents are spending the exact same amount of time on screens as their teenagers. And so, of course, that comes to the issue not just of teaching, but of modeling.
Well, I know this is kind of a relatively new phenomenon. TV's been around for a while, but it's really only been 15 years since the first iPhone was released. I hate to admit this, but just a few weeks ago, I was dealing with blurry vision in the morning. I thought I'm having an allergic reaction to the new detergent, or maybe I'm having allergy issues. Went to the eye doctor, and she said, oh, no, you have astigmatism from staring at a screen too much.
Ouch.
Yeah. 37, get my first pair of glasses because I've had too much screen time. So we may not want to know the answer to this, but do we know what kind of dangers, other than astigmatism, what kind of dangers are associated with extreme screen time and extreme screen exposure?
Yeah, there's a lot of different factors, of course. A lot of medical doctors are telling us that this rewires the brain, particularly when children develop media addiction early on. So it actually creates the same kind of reaction that people have with crack, or the same type of experience that they have with other narcotics. The problem is you can't just say, I'm not going to hang around with those kinds of friends anymore. I won't be around my techie friends anymore. You can't isolate yourself in the same way that you could if you were an alcoholic or a drug addict, where you say, I just won't go to that part of town anymore or whatever. It's everywhere. Screens are everywhere. So it's a challenge. And as you said, it is a new phenomenon. I saw a documentary on the History Channel that was listing the top 100 inventions of all time. And I actually sat and watched the whole stupid thing because I was curious, I was thinking the light bulb, there's a whole bunch of them. The printing press was big, the automobile. Turns out it was the smartphone. They say nothing has revolutionized the world more than the smartphone. So it really is a different world than, like myself, I grew up mostly in the 1980s, and we had video games and we had television, but not like young people today. There's also the aspect of what watching violent movies or video games where our virtual life is threatened, if you will, because we're so involved in watching what's happening on the screen, and we take it into ourselves as though this is happening to us. And I read a book from a medical doctor who said that if you spend a couple of hours watching an action movie, like a Marvel movie, or you play video games for like an hour, he said there's only two ways to reset from the adrenaline rush that goes through your system. The one is you have to sleep for 7 hours, or you have to have sustained physical exercise for 30 minutes or more. And he said the two things that gamers tend to never do is get enough exercise or enough sleep. And so we actually can create high blood pressure, migraines, like a whole host of physiological problems, not to mention just the emotional and spiritual and psychological ones.
And it's amazing. I've seen now like energy drinks are geared towards gamers.
Yes.
Like who would have thought that they'd have their own line? But I want to go back to something because I don't want our listeners to miss this. Sometimes when we talk about something being like crack, we're using it figuratively. Like we'll say Cinnamon Toast Crunch is so addicting, it's like crack. You're using this in a literal sense. I mean, this addiction is similar to that, right? Like this is not an exaggeration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know of stories that I hear from parents. Just heard one today of a 22-year-old who basically can't function, can't have a job, doesn't have relationships, has developed massive social anxiety to the point that he doesn't want to leave the house because he's addicted to video games. These are young people being raised in Christian homes. So obviously not all people have that kind of extreme reaction, but there are people who have addictive personalities, and this kind of technology can feed into that and can be very devastating for people who don't have the self-control to be able to limit themselves.
Yeah, and so many parents are walking that tightrope of knowing how much screen time is okay and how much is too much. What are some principles that can help us figure this out?
I think one thing as a parent is to watch for those children that seem to have the addictive behavior. So if you give your child, say, a 30-minute screen time limit, and you say, okay, you can play this game for 30 minutes and then you need to move on and do something else, the ones that can't handle having to be called away, that don't have the self-government to turn it off and walk away from it, but they have an emotional meltdown over it, those are the ones you want to pay special attention to, because this could very well be a massive problem in their life.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to keep talking about this because this is fascinating. It's sobering, but this is so needed. So we will be right back.
Did you know that because of D6 Heroes, Randall House and D6 Family are able to equip families far and wide in the area of generational discipleship? Due to the financial gifts of both individuals and churches, D6 curriculum has been translated into multiple languages and distributed across the globe, including restricted access countries for use in the underground church. In short, because of the financial gifts of individuals like you, moms and dads all over the world can pass their faith to the next generation of believers. Would you consider becoming a D6 hero? A D6 hero is an individual who invests their financial resources in the ministry of Randall House and D6 Family to ensure that believers can transfer their faith through the church and home. Please visit d6hero.com to join the ranks of our heroes and to explore other areas where your financial investment can have an impact.
We are right back, and we're talking to Israel Wayne, and we're talking about techno-parenting and how to navigate screens and media. Now, there's a worry among some that their kids will fall behind the rapid pace of culture if they're not exposed to the latest tech. Our schools are using it. We saw with the pandemic, a lot of kids were bringing computers home and had to use Zoom, and some of the parents didn't know how to do it, so they were relying on the kids to do it. And so there is that fear, or there's that anxiety that if our kids aren't exposed to it and always around it, they may not know what to do, or they may fall behind their peers. How can parents navigate that issue?
I have a book that I've written called Raising Them Up, Parenting for Christians, and I have a chapter called Techno-Parenting in that book. And one of the concepts that I discuss is teaching our children to have a mentality or mindset of being a producer rather than a mere consumer. So for me, it's not the technology that's bad because it's a tool, just like a hammer or any other tool. And the question that I ask my teenagers is I say, okay, so you want to purchase this technology. What are you planning to make with it? What are you going to build with it? What are you going to construct? Because I want them to have a mentality of adding value to the world around them by loving God and loving and serving other people. So in what way does this help us fulfill the mission that God's put us here on earth to do, which is to love Him and serve Him by loving and serving other people? So, we're always living either for the kingdom of God or the kingdom of self, right? And so much of what we do in society is we work a job as a necessary evil to earn the money to entertain ourselves and amuse ourselves, which is an interesting term in itself because amusement comes from the Latin a, meaning no, and muse, which means to think about or ponder something. So amusement means no thinking. So it's interesting how when we come home from a hard day of work or something, that's what we want to do. We just want to veg out, turn the TV on, flip channels, and just not think. And so what I try to encourage my children to do is to say, if you're going to be using technology to produce something and construct something that has benefit and service to the world around you, I'll actually get behind that financially. Like I'll put money behind that. But if this is just, you're going to spend 1,000 hours in the next year playing this video game, no. That's not something that I'm going to encourage. So to me, it's teaching them to have that producing, contributing, serving mentality rather than just absorbing and consuming and turning in, from themselves. And I think we're also creating like just social anxiety and social isolation because people are so interned with their iPhone and their iBuds and their iPods and everything where it's like I'm a universe of one and we don't have shared experiences with real people in real community anymore. It's a whole culture shift.
Yeah, and I love what you said because there is that danger and there's that tendency where we want to just kind of hold up the phone and be like, this is evil, this is bad, all technology is bad, all new things are terrible. But like you said, you could be a producer. There could be something good that comes from this.
Totally.
And I say there could, like it's rare.
You're doing it. You have a podcast.
That is true. I didn't think about the irony that we are here, that there is some good that comes from it. And I like that because as Christians, sometimes we have a tendency to be so far about the negative and what we're against that, like you said, this is a tool. It can be used. We talked earlier on a different podcast about how, our phones are being used to translate for people. Yes. And we are crossing barriers that we never could before because we can now understand each other. So I love that you said that. And kind of on that same note, when kids are so accustomed to having a screen in their face, or at least for a long amount of time, it can be difficult when we take that away, or it can be difficult when we lessen that time and they find there's more time on their hands. And so it's always helpful for that to be replaced by something else.
Yes.
What are some healthy alternatives to phones and tablets and things like that kids can enjoy and that you have seen them enjoy?
Sure. Well, I'm going to throw in something spiritual. We're allowed to do that on this podcast,
absolutely.
Right? So one thing that I encourage families to do is to make sure that we try to have some sort of regular family devotions or family Bible time. Okay, there's the big downer. But then, okay, the fun stuff. What do we do for fun? Because we need to do that too. I have a friend in Michigan where I live who has developed a website. It's really more of a movement. It's called 1,000 Hours Outside. And she just has created fun and engaging ways to help your family to find things to do outside the house, outdoors, away from screens. And so there are a lot of blogs and podcasts and things that she's produced that help people with those kinds of ideas, because literally a lot of young people don't even know what to do. They stand outside and say, I'm hot, I'm bored, I don't want to do this. Can I go in and play now? And so, yeah, we really do have to find things, I think, to get our children engaged, and it's funny with children. They're like, yeah, but if I have a Wii, that's exercise. I mean, when I was growing up in the 80s, and again, I don't want to go back to that. Those were the good old days. But we actually had the potential of breaking our head on a bicycle or a skateboard, and now it's like we can only do that virtually from our couch.
Now, I will say I feel a little conviction because my son loves to be outdoors. He would be outdoors all day if he could run around. I'm the one going there's bugs all over the place. I'm sweating. I will tell you, though, we discovered this thing in our neighborhood. It's amazing. I don't know if our listeners have ever heard of it, but it's called a library. And they have these things called books. And my mind was
Kindle,
blown. Right? No, you can hold them in your hand.
Oh, wow.
They let you take them home for 30 days. And I'm being facetious a little bit, but it was the first time I'd actually been in a public library in 20 years maybe. And
that's right.
I thought, wow, this place still exists. I didn't have to pay any money to take these books with me. And it was a cool experience. And then, of course, my son, the little reader, gets to grab all the books he wants. But I just, the things that you shared, that's so good because, like you said, we go back to the 80s. We didn't have to think hard about what we were going to do. We got to be bored.
That's right.
We knew what boredom was, and when we were bored, we would say we were bored, but then we'd go outside and do something.
That's
and
right.
Wiffle ball. We could be by ourselves, shoot basketball, run around the yard, and we kind of figured it out. We don't necessarily let kids be bored these days. But like I said, earlier, ultimately, this isn't just a kid problem. It would be great if we could just throw it all on them and just ignore the problems ourselves. But it does fall on us too. So what are some healthy parameters that parents can put in place for themselves to make sure they're not becoming slaves to technology?
Yeah, well, I think for myself, one thing, I have 5 sons. And so one thing that I do that they know is that I have accountability and filtering software on every device that I have, and my wife has the passwords for those. And I don't do that out of some sense of legalism. I do that so that my wife has peace of mind regarding what I'm accessing. And I can't expect my teenagers to embrace parameters for purity, for example, if I'm not willing to do that myself. So those are things that I put in place for my own life voluntarily. And we really do have to model that. I think not bringing the device to the dinner table, having certain times where we put it aside, we're having a conversation, we don't pick it up and randomly start scrolling when we're talking to our children or our spouse. So there are a lot of things like that we really can model appropriate limits, or we can model bad behavior. And it's cliche, but more is caught than taught in parenting. And they watch how we live. And if what we're saying doesn't line up with that, they tend to default towards what we do or just reject our values and our input altogether. And we really don't want that.
Well, nothing makes me feel worse than when I have a 3-year-old take the phone out of my hand and say, "Daddy, put phone down and play with me."
Wow.
Yikes. That's, that hits you right in the heart and you realize, but as we close up, and I thank you for sharing all this, this is going to be one of those podcasts that you listen to that you can probably give an amen to everything Israel has said and say, man, I agree with that. That's so good. And walk away and not apply a single thing and think that's for somebody else or that's only for my kids. Parents, I'm giving you a challenge with what you've heard today to see if you can apply it. And I'm talking to myself too, because I have not done a good job of this. I have struggled with this as a father and as a husband, always having a phone in my hand. Sometimes I'll close an app and open the same one right again because I can't even remember that I was just looking at it. It just kind of becomes old routine. So listeners, I am challenging you to find some of these principles, find some of these parameters, put these in place. let's do it together, because I don't want to sound like I'm preaching, because I need help with this. But I thank you so much for sharing this stuff, because this is where our culture is headed. This is where we are right now. This is what we desperately need help with. And this is a spiritual issue. This is not just a tech issue. This is a spiritual issue that is affecting us and affecting our families. And it all comes back to even family discipleship. We're going to spend our time doing something. We need to spend it we need to spend time doing something that matters. Israel, thank you so much for sharing this. It's been convicting, but it's also been encouraging, and it's been practical. Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless.
Okay, Marianne, you led us into this without the shame, without the guilt. What's the phrase that really struck you that Israel said that you appreciated? No shame, no guilt. Let's talk about that one. Not that we're going to carry on that conversation, but I want to this is that underscore, that underline what he said.
I think when he talked about the perspective of when we're navigating techno-parenting, that we're discipling our children to see the device as a producer rather than being a consumer, that we see ourselves and we see these as tools, as is it bringing value to the world around you? What a great discipleship question of, okay, sons, you've got this device. It is not a right. It is a privilege.
Yes.
So how is this adding value to the world around you?
Yes.
Is this helping you live for God or live for self? And I think that is a good question. And that's a discipleship path. That is a discipleship path.
It is indeed. I love that, the producer versus consumer mentality. Another way we can look at our devices is understanding, because he got me thinking along this line, and I thought, okay, what's another way I could say this? And my thought on it was, our devices are like faucets. We can choose to turn it on. We can choose to turn it off. Now, the truth is, when I open my phone, I have multiple apps, and for that matter, multiple websites. Mm-hmm. Some of them I turn on may bring some garbage into my container, where some of it can bring a lot more wholesome, pure, healthy. And we're in charge of that faucet.
That's right.
We're pushing the buttons. And so
that's right.
I love his idea of we produce what we take in. So we're the ones turning the knobs on the faucets, is my point. Right. I loved his analogy there.
I think one other thing that we need to be mindful of that was just so powerful, and I mean powerful, it was really convicting from God, was him reminding us, and this is language that we use a lot in D6 family, and discipleship is caught, not just taught, and he used language like teaching and modeling. And I desperately don't want my kids to be mastered by their devices deeply. I mean, I pray about this, you guys. Like, I wrestle with, I've cried tears about it.
Yeah.
But I just want to say he addressed it in the interview. If we want that so bad for our kids, we've got to be careful as adults that when we're trying to engage in face-to-face conversation, that we don't pick up our phone and start scrolling through our devices while we're trying to have a conversation where they're seeing us addicted to our device and we're locked onto to our device, all the while we're trying to ask our child to not be mastered by our device. And so that wasn't a shame thing. That was I've got to make sure. In discipleship and leadership, we can't lead anyone anywhere we aren't willing to go ourselves.
Yes, man.
And so that's where we've got to land here in techno parenting is, I want to lead my kids to want Jesus, to see Jesus, to notice the world around them, to be outside and engage creation and nature. But I've got to make sure that I'm leading them in that way, and that they're not just hearing me say, get off your device, but they're watching me put my device face down.
That's correct. Our devices have become our oxygen. We can't go anywhere without it. It's like that oxygen tank we're drawing around. And if it gets too far from us, our hands twitch, we go to looking for it. We get into panic mode. We really do. And there's something to be said. And I know at Randall House and D6 Family Ministry, we have a leadership conference for teens. And when they check into the conference, they turn in their cell phones. and they don't get them back for about 12 days. And that is a time where we can unplug and plug back into Him. And so I would challenge our listeners, number one, consider the principles you've learned from Israel Lane today. Number two, when we have the opportunity to fast, there are multiple ways to fast other than food. One of which that I think may be more sacrificial and more difficult is to have an electronic fast. Maybe just for a few hours, maybe for 24 hours. It will not kill you. You can let your closest family members know, hey, I'm not going to be available, on social media for this period of time. If you comment, I'm not dead. Whatever you need to do, take a break. Maybe leave everything off except your phone so that you can be reached. But it might not be bad to turn it all off for just a few hours or a day or whatever you need. And when you have a fast, it's not about giving up something. It's about giving into something. And so use this time to turn your reflections back to the right faucet you turn on from Christ, from God, in His Word and in prayer time. So we're going to pray those principles for you in a good way, because our devices are constantly that controller of our lives more than we want to admit. So until next week, we're going to be praying that you have a wonderful time. And next week, we're going to be interviewing Dr. Ken Coley and Dr. Blair Robinson, who's going to challenge us as dads to step up with that family time in our homes. Really, really looking forward to their practical ways to do this. And until then, we'll be praying for you to have heartfelt conversations and connections with those around you, teaching them Deuteronomy 6 principles. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.